When you check your smartphone or rage against economic inequality, you're living out a philosophical battle that began with Karl Marx. Does matter create mind, or mind create matter? Marx boldly asserted that life is not determined by consciousness, but consciousness by life, challenging centuries of idealist thought and placing material conditions at the heart of human experience. Today, as we navigate between digital and physical realities, Marx's materialist foundation clashes with phenomenology's lived experience, existentialism's radical freedom, and the fluid identities of post-structuralism. What remains of Marx's philosophical vision in our fragmented intellectual landscape? Where have modern thinkers surpassed him? The answers reveal surprising connections between the 19th century revolutionary and today's philosophical frontiers. Karl Marx transcends simple categorization. He stands simultaneously as revolutionary philosopher and rigorous social theorist, whose ideas continue to reverberate through contemporary thought. Beyond political economy, Marx constructed a comprehensive philosophical system that demands serious intellectual engagement. Today, we'll explore three foundational domains where Marx's philosophical vision collides with modern developments: his materialist ontology that grounds reality in economic conditions, his dialectical methodology that sees contradiction as the engine of history, and his theory of knowledge that unites theory with transformative practice. Rather than offering simplistic judgments of right or wrong, we'll evaluate these philosophical battlegrounds through primary texts, from Marx's own writings to the work of his most formidable critics and unexpected allies, revealing where his thought has been validated, challenged, or profoundly transformed by subsequent philosophical innovations. At the foundation of Marx's philosophical architecture stands his ontological materialism, a radical assertion that reality is fundamentally material rather than mental or spiritual. In The German Ideology, Marx declares, "The premises from which we begin are not arbitrary ones, not dogmas, but real premises from which abstraction can only be made in the imagination. They are the real individuals, their activity and the material conditions under which they live." This materialist position represents a deliberate inversion of Hegel's idealism. Where Hegel saw the unfolding of absolute spirit as the engine of history, Marx anchors consciousness in concrete economic conditions. For Marx, we don't think and then exist. We produce our material lives, and this production determines our consciousness. Our ideas, values, and philosophies emerge from our economic relations, not the reverse. This inversion was revolutionary, shifting philosophical attention from abstract speculation to concrete material conditions that shape human existence. The implications were profound. If consciousness derives from material conditions, then transforming society requires changing economic structures rather than merely critiquing ideas. Philosophy itself becomes inseparable from material practice. This insight continues to resonate across disciplines from sociology to cultural studies, where material conditions are recognized as foundational to cultural and intellectual developments. Marx's materialism found unexpected allies in American pragmatism. John Dewey, though never a Marxist, similarly rejected abstract theorizing detached from practice. In Experience and Nature, Dewey argues that knowledge emerges through practical engagement with material conditions, a position strikingly parallel to Marx's elevation of praxis. Both philosophers reject the spectator theory of knowledge, seeing ideas as tools for navigating and transforming material reality. This pragmatist validation extends through Richard Rorty's neo-pragmatism, which similarly rejects the notion of mind as a mirror of nature. For Rorty as for Marx, knowledge serves practical purposes rather than representing some pre-existing reality. Both traditions view thought as emerging from practical engagements with the world rather than transcending material conditions. Yet phenomenology mounted a formidable challenge to Marx's strict materialism. Maurice Merleau-Ponty in Phenomenology of Perception argues, "The world is not what I think, but what I live through." This shifts the philosophical focus to lived bodily experience that precedes any division between subject and object, material and ideal. Our bodies are not merely objects determined by material conditions, but the very medium through which we experience and understand the world. For Merleau-Ponty, consciousness and materiality are intertwined in ways that complicate Marx's neat materialist hierarchy. The phenomenological challenge suggests that Marx's materialism, while right to reject abstract idealism, remains too mechanical. Our lived experiences reveal a more complex interplay between consciousness and materiality than Marx's formulation allows. Materiality doesn't simply determine consciousness, but provides the field in which consciousness operates and develops its own structures and meanings. Martin Heidegger further destabilized Marx's materialism through his concept of being in the world. In Being and Time, Heidegger writes that Dasein is an entity which, in its very being, comports itself understandingly towards that being. This suggests that human existence involves an understanding relationship with being that cannot be reduced to material conditions alone. Our engagements with tools, artifacts, and others reveal a world already meaningful before theoretical reflection, a pre-theoretical understanding that Marx's materialism struggles to accommodate. Heidegger's analysis reveals that we don't first encounter bare material reality and then impose meaning upon it. Rather, we already find ourselves in a meaningful world structured by practical concerns, social relations, and historical traditions. These meanings aren't simply determined by economic structures, but emerge through our ongoing engagement with the world. Heidegger thus complicates the neat division between materiality and consciousness that Marx's philosophy depends upon. Existentialism delivered perhaps the most direct challenge. Jean-Paul Sartre, despite his Marxist sympathies, insisted on the irreducibility of human freedom. In Existentialism is a humanism, Sartre declares. Man is nothing else but what he makes of himself. This radical freedom transcends material determination. Even in oppressive conditions, humans retain the freedom to define their relation to circumstances. This assertion of ontological freedom confronts Marx's emphasis on material determination, suggesting consciousness possesses autonomy beyond its material conditions. Sartre's later work attempted to reconcile this existential freedom with Marxist materialism, but the tension remains unresolved. How can humans be both determined by material conditions and fundamentally free? This philosophical problem continues to animate debates about structure and agency, determinism and freedom across multiple disciplines. Contemporary philosopher Slavoj Žižek has attempted to reconcile these tensions through a return to Hegelian dialectics. In The Sublime Object of Ideology, Žižek argues that the proper dimension of subjectivity emerges only through the experience of the contingency and meaninglessness of the positive, substantial order of being. Žižek preserves Marx's materialism, while acknowledging that subjectivity emerges precisely in the gaps and contradictions within material reality. This dialectical approach suggests that consciousness both emerges from and disrupts material conditions, neither purely determined nor completely free, but engaged in constant negotiation with the material world. The subject is both a product of material conditions and something that exceeds and transforms those conditions. Through this dialectical lens, Žižek offers a sophisticated reinterpretation of materialism that incorporates insights from psychoanalysis, phenomenology, and existentialism without abandoning Marx's core materialist commitment. The contemporary philosophical landscape thus reveals Marx's materialism as both foundational and limited. His insistence on materiality's primacy remains crucial for understanding how economic conditions shape consciousness, yet subsequent philosophical developments have revealed a more complex interrelationship between mind and matter than Marx's 19th century formulation could accommodate. The philosophical frontier now lies in articulating this relationship without collapsing into either crude materialism or naive idealism, a project that continues to animate philosophical inquiry today. Marx's philosophical methodology centers on dialectics, a complex intellectual inheritance from Hegel that Marx claimed to have turned right side up. Where Hegel's dialectic tracked the movement of spirit through thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, Marx applied this dynamic framework to material reality itself. For Marx, contradiction isn't merely logical, but exists objectively within social and economic structures. Reality itself moves through contradiction, negation, and transformation. This dialectical method finds its most sophisticated application in Capital, where Marx analyzes capitalism as inherently contradictory. He writes, "The development of contradictions of a given historical form of production is the only historical way in which it can be dissolved and reconstructed on a new basis. Capitalism's internal tensions between use value and exchange value, necessary labour and surplus labour, socialised production and private appropriation, generate crises that dialectically propel historical development. Marx's dialectical approach offered several methodological advantages. It captured the dynamic, historical character of social systems rather than treating them as static structures. It emphasized internal relations rather than isolated facts, and it integrated normative and descriptive elements, allowing Marx to simultaneously analyze and critique capitalism. These features made dialectics a powerful tool for understanding complex evolving social totalities. However, this methodology encountered formidable challenges from the analytic tradition's emphasis on formal logic. Bertrand Russell, in A History of Western Philosophy, delivered a scathing assessment. The dialectic method is incapable of proving a single fact. For Russell, dialectical reasoning violated basic logical principles, particularly the law of non-contradiction, which holds that something cannot simultaneously be and not be in the same respect. Russell insisted that philosophical reasoning must conform to mathematical logic, with its emphasis on precision, consistency, and clear definitions. This analytic critique exposed genuine weaknesses in dialectical thinking. Marx's use of contradiction often oscillates between logical contradiction and real-world conflict, creating ambiguity. His predictions about capitalism's internal contradictions leading to its collapse have not been straightforwardly vindicated, and dialectical concepts like negation of the negation resist formalization in ways that limit their scientific utility. These limitations have led many philosophers to view dialectics as a pre-scientific methodology superseded by formal logic. Ludwig Wittgenstein's logical atomism, developed in the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus, offered an alternative vision of philosophical methodology. Wittgenstein famously declared that the world is the totality of facts, not of things, suggesting that reality consists of discrete atomic facts rather than dialectical processes. This atomistic approach stands in stark contrast to Marx's emphasis on internal relations and dynamic totalities. Where Marx saw contradiction as fundamental, early Wittgenstein sought a perfect logical language that would eliminate contradiction entirely. Yet Karl Popper, despite his sustained critique of Marxist historicism, acknowledged value in dialectical thinking. In Conjectures and Refutations, Popper describes scientific progress in terms remarkably similar to dialectics. The method of trial and error is a method of eliminating false theories. It is a method of tentative solutions, of conjectures which are controlled by criticism. This process parallels dialectical negation but avoids its metaphysical claims. For Popper, dialectics captures something important about intellectual development, even if it fails as formal logic. The later Wittgenstein also moved away from logical atomism toward a more contextual, practice-oriented approach that bears surprising similarities to dialectical thinking. His concept of language games embeds meaning in social practices rather than logical structures, a position with clear parallels to Marx's emphasis on praxis. This convergence suggests that despite analytic philosophy's initial rejection of dialectics, certain dialectical insights have re-emerged in different forms. More recently, philosopher Roy Basker has developed critical realism as a sophisticated philosophical framework that incorporates dialectical elements within a rigorous scientific methodology. In Dialectic, the Pulse of Freedom, Basker argues that dialectical critical realism involves a deepening of critical realism's original concerns with ontology, science, critique, and emancipation. This approach acknowledges the structured, layered nature of reality while recognizing the transformative potential of contradiction and negation. Critical realism maintains Marx's emphasis on real contradictions in social structures, while addressing the analytic critique by distinguishing between different types of contradiction. It preserves dialectics' capacity to integrate descriptive and normative elements, while developing a more rigorous account of causality and structure. This synthesis suggests that dialectical thinking, while transformed, remains indispensable for understanding complex social systems. The contemporary philosophical landscape thus reveals a nuanced evaluation of Marx's dialectical method. While formal logic has decisively superseded dialectics as the foundation for scientific reasoning, aspects of dialectical thinking persist in various forms of critical theory. The challenge remains developing methodologies that capture the dynamic, contradictory nature of social reality without sacrificing logical rigor, a project that continues to animate philosophical and social scientific inquiry today. Marx's Epistemology, his theory of how we know and what constitutes truth centers on the revolutionary concept of praxis, the unity of theory and transformative action. Unlike contemplative philosophy that merely interprets the world, Marx insisted on knowledge that transforms reality. His 11th thesis on Feuerbach stands as perhaps the most concise expression of this position. The philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point, however, is to change it. This bold statement represents a radical departure from traditional epistemology. For Marx, truth isn't a static correspondence between ideas and reality, but emerges through practical engagement with material conditions. Knowledge isn't discovered through passive contemplation, but produced through active transformation of the world. This view dissolves the traditional separation between knowing subject and known object, between theory and practice, between interpretation and transformation. The implications are profound. If knowledge emerges through practical activity, then different class positions yield different forms of knowledge. The proletariat, through its transformative labour and revolutionary potential, has privileged access to certain truths inaccessible to the bourgeoisie. This standpoint epistemology suggests that some social positions provide better access to truth than others, a controversial claim that continues to animate debates about objectivity and perspectivism. Marx's practical conception of knowledge found significant validation in American pragmatism. John Dewey's instrumentalist theory of knowledge bears striking similarities to Marx's praxis. In Experience and Nature, Dewey argues that knowledge emerges from doing that which involves physical materials, tools, and techniques, doing of such a nature as to enable us to discover the conditions and consequences of their experienced qualities. Like Marx, Dewey rejects spectator theories of knowledge, seeing ideas as tools for navigating and transforming the world rather than static representations. This pragmatist parallel extends through Richard Rorty's neo-pragmatism, which similarly rejects correspondence theories of truth in favour of knowledge as a tool for coping with reality. In Philosophy and the Mirror of Nature, Rorty argues against the metaphor of mind as a mirror reflecting pre-existing reality, suggesting instead that knowledge serves practical human purposes. This anti-representationalist position resonates with Marx's insistence that knowledge emerges through practical engagement rather than passive reflection. However, post-structuralist thinkers have raised profound challenges to Marx's epistemological certainty. Michel Foucault, in Power Knowledge, argues that truth is a thing of this world. It is produced only by virtue of multiple forms of constraint. Each society has its regime of truth. For Foucault, knowledge and power are inseparable. Truth claims function as instruments of power, rather than neutral representations of reality. This genealogical approach undermines Marx's confidence that revolutionary praxis reveals objective truth, suggesting instead that all knowledge claims, including Marxist ones, operate within regimes of power. Jacques Derrida's deconstructive approach further problematizes Marx's epistemological certainty. In Spectres of Marx, Derrida writes, "Inheritance is never a given, it is always a task, to reaffirm what comes before us." Derrida suggests that Marx's texts themselves remain open to radically different interpretations, undermining any claim to definitive knowledge. The meaning of Marx's work isn't fixed, but continuously recontextualized through ongoing interpretive practice. This textual indeterminacy challenges the epistemological confidence that animated Marx's revolutionary project. Yet Jürgen Habermas has attempted to salvage the emancipatory potential of knowledge while acknowledging these post-structural critiques. In Knowledge and Human Interests, Habermas identifies three distinct knowledge interests: technical interest in control, practical interest in understanding, and emancipatory interest in freedom from domination. This framework preserves Marx's insight that knowledge serves human interests while developing a more differentiated account of those interests. For Habermas, emancipatory knowledge remains possible through critical self-reflection and communicative action, even after acknowledging knowledge's social and historical situatedness. Feminist epistemologies have extended Marx's insights in particularly fruitful directions. Sandra Harding's standpoint theory builds upon Marx's class-based epistemology to develop a sophisticated account of how gender shapes knowledge production. In The Science Question in Feminism, Harding argues for strong objectivity that acknowledges the social location of knowers rather than pretending to a view from nowhere. This approach preserves the possibility of objective knowledge while recognizing how power relations shape what questions get asked, what methods seem legitimate, and whose testimony counts as credible. Donna Haraway further develops this tradition through her concept of situated knowledges. In Situated Knowledges, The Science Question in Feminism and the Privilege of Partial Perspective, Haraway argues that only partial perspective promises objective vision. Against both relativism and claims to universal knowledge, Haraway suggests that objectivity emerges through the integration of multiple situated perspectives. This sophisticated position maintains Marx's commitment to objectivity while incorporating post-structural insights about knowledge's partiality and power-laden character. The contemporary epistemological landscape thus reveals Marx's theory of knowledge as both prescient and limited. His integration of theory and practice, his recognition of knowledge's social dimensions, and his emphasis on knowledge's transformative potential all anticipated crucial developments in 20th century thought. Yet his confidence in revolutionary praxis as a path to objective truth has been complicated by subsequent insights about knowledge's entanglement with power, language, and social location. The philosophical frontier now lies in developing epistemologies that preserve the possibility of critique while acknowledging the situated, partial character of all knowledge claims, a project that continues to draw inspiration from Marx's revolutionary epistemology while moving beyond its limitations. Viewed through the lens of subsequent philosophical developments, Marx emerges neither as defunct 19th century relic nor as timeless prophet, but as a thinker whose insights have been simultaneously validated, challenged, and transformed by the philosophical currents that followed him. His materialist ontology continues to provide an essential corrective to idealist abstractions, reminding us that consciousness emerges from concrete conditions rather than floating freely above them. Yet phenomenology and existentialism have revealed a more complex dialectic between materiality and freedom than Marx's framework could accommodate, a relationship where consciousness both emerges from and transcends its material conditions in ways that resist reduction to economic determinism. Similarly, while formal logic has rightfully superseded dialectics as a methodological foundation for rigorous inquiry, dialectical thinking persists in critical theory's attention to contradiction, internal relations, and historical process. Marx's emphasis on the dynamic contradictory nature of social systems remains indispensable for understanding complex totalities that resist atomistic analysis. Perhaps most presciently, Marx's practical epistemology anticipated pragmatism's focus on knowledge as transformative action rather than passive contemplation. His insistence that truth emerges through praxis rather than abstract theorizing finds powerful echoes in contemporary approaches that recognize knowledge's situated, partial character while preserving critical capacities. Marx's greatest philosophical contribution may not lie in any specific doctrine, but in his insistence, echoed by Richard Bernstein, that philosophy must be engaged with the world. This engagement continues to animate philosophical inquiry across diverse traditions, from Habermas's communicative ethics to Martha Nussbaum's capabilities approach to Cornel West's prophetic pragmatism. In our era of accelerating technological change, environmental crisis, and persistent inequality, Marx challenges us to see philosophy not as abstract contemplation, but as critical engagement with the world, a challenge that remains as vital today as it was in the 19th century. His legacy lives not in dogmatic certainties, but in the restless questioning that drives philosophy forward, always skeptical, always searching, always committed to understanding the world in order to change it.